Hello, my name is Joe Mitzenmacher, and I'm the Reference and Electronic Services Librarian at the Loyola University Chicago Law Library. And today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the sources that we learned about during your first year legal research class and how they would apply to doing research on your advocacy problem. So we'll begin the presentation with a reminder of the subjects that we covered during first year legal research. Started with secondary sources, then moved on to talking about researching cases, both researching by topic and then using citators. Then we talked about federal statutes, federal administrative law, and Illinois law resources. A couple things to remember about that. Number one is that not everything on this list here is applicable to every single research problem. And then the other reminder is to take a look at the First Year Legal Research Guide. We have the URL up there for you. And the First Year Legal Research Guide has additional information about all of these sources, as well as information on how to find them in the library, whether in print or online, and also information on citation formatting. We have examples of citation formatting and references to the Blue Book pages where you can find more information on those. So here's what we're going to hit on today during the class, the things that apply to our research problem. Notice that we're not going to be talking about Illinois law, we're not going to be talking about federal administrative law because those are not components to this research problem. And while there is a constitutional law issue regarding the Fourth Amendment, we're not going to be using the annotated code here to look for cases that interpret the Fourth Amendment since we've already been given some. And we'll see that in a second. We're also going to take this in a slightly different order than the way we learned it during your first year legal research class, because where you start depends on what material you have to start with, what your access points are. So for this problem, we have some cases that were given to you in the assignment memorandum, so we're going to start with those, and then we'll look at some secondary sources that will help you expand on, explain, and clarify those primary law sources. And then the last thing we're going to look at is some research guides and study aids. We're going to look at the First Year Legal Research Guide, the Research Strategies tab, the Appellate Advocacy Research Guide, the West Study Aid subscription online, and the Study Aids Research Guide. So when we get started on a research project, the number one thing you have to do, the first thing you have to do, is to make sure to read carefully everything that you've been given, and then to ask questions to make sure that you completely understand the scope of the project and what is expected of you. And then you want to think about the relevant issues and what resources you're going to need in order to answer the question that's been asked. And part of reading everything carefully is to make sure that you understand all the terms of art, all the definitions, all the legal jargon, legal terminology that you may need to work with. So this is important here. So when you're exploring an unfamiliar area of law, there's really two steps that the research process splits into. The first step is learning the contours of the law, just the general overview of the law. And then the second step is so first of all, you have to understand enough about the issue in order to understand how to answer the question. Then you move on to the second step, which is determining what sources are necessary in order to focus in on the answer that you're trying to get to. So the example I like to use, sort of the analogy, this is like if you're using Google Maps and you're in an unfamiliar city, you may find a location that you're looking for as a little pinpoint on the map. That's great for that specific answer, but that without the context of being zoomed out, you don't have any idea what that really means. You need to be able to, again, like with the Google Maps, you zoom out and you see, okay, what are some nearby landmarks? What are the nearby highways? So you can get the big picture first, and then you will understand better what that little pinprick on the map really means. So when that comes to legal research, I use an example here from statutes, even though we're not going to be looking at statutes here. So when you're dealing with a statute or with a regulation, you don't just want to read the one section that you found. You want to read all the surrounding sections, or if possible, the whole statute. Because remember that statutes and regulations are part of a bigger scheme. They're not individual documents. You want to look for related sections nearby. You want to look for definition sections that are toward the beginning. To make sure that you're not missing anything relevant, and to make sure that you understand how the terms are defined in the statute, and also how courts have interpreted the relevant terminology. So for this problem, what that means is you're going to begin by carefully reviewing the materials that you've been given with your assignment. Read through the fact pattern, read through all the supporting materials that were provided to you in your packet. You got to be able to understand those facts so that when you discover what the law is, then you can properly apply it to those facts are. And you also have to make sure that you understand what questions you are answering, and also, just as important, you have to make sure you understand what questions you're not supposed to be answering. So one way to help out with this is to do a research log. And when you do a research log, you're going to record as you go along. Now, despite kind of what we told you in first year legal research, we kind of made it seem like a linear process where you first do this, then you do this, then you do this, and then you're done. The real world research is a lot more it's a lot less linear and a lot more fits and starts. You know, you start with something, you don't understand it, you go to a different kind of source to try and understand it, then you go back and you find more cases. There's a lot more back and forth than what we showed you during first year legal research. So by having a good research log, this will help you to make sure, number one, that you don't repeat your work, and also to help remember searches that worked, so the searches that gave you the best results. You do have access to saved search histories, like in Lexis and Westlaw. You can go back and see what you did. The problem with those is it doesn't help if you don't remember which searches that you did gave you the best results, and also if you do if you use two different services, if you do some of your work in Lexis, some of your work in Westlaw, it's not all in one place. So by doing it in a research log, you can consolidate everything and have it all available to you in one place. Now, if you remember from first year legal research, we talked about the one good case research strategy. What this strategy is that when you're doing research, you find one good case on the issue, and then you use that case to find others like it to help you expand on your research and learn more about the issue. Now, for every good case that you find, there are multiple ways to use that to help you with your research. We've listed the three that you can use right here. You can read the cases that are cited in the good case that you found, because those are going to talk about the same issues. You can look for the pertinent headnotes, the subject matter that relates to the issue that you're talking about. Lexis and Westlaw both have headnote systems. We're going to talk about that. And then you can also run the case through citators, which would be either Shepard's in Lexis or KeyCite in Westlaw. And then you do that to, number one, make sure that your case is still good law, that it hasn't been overruled or otherwise weakened by subsequent case law. You can use the citators to find additional cases that are on the same subject. And you can also do an alert in Shepard's or KeyCite to see if new cases are coming up, so you can be automatically notified when other cases talk about the case that you started with. And what we're going to do then is we're going to pick out the California versus Cirolo case. That was the a U.S. Supreme Court case, one of the cases that was cited in the district court opinion that was given to you with the materials for your assignment. And we're going to use that as an example to show you how to use a case to find other cases like that. So we're going to start by going into Westlaw to see that case. All right, so this is the California versus Cirolo case, the Supreme Court opinion. We were able to find that in Westlaw because I was given the citation to it. It was in your materials. And this should bring up the point to use the one good case strategy to get your one good case that you start with. Either somebody's going to give you the citation, like it was in your assignment, or sometimes you may go to a secondary source and find it there. Those are usually the two best ways to get your one good case. In this case, since we were given the citation, we start with that. So again, remember there are three different ways to use the case. So the first thing we said was to read the cases that are cited in the case, because if the court relied on those cases, you'll want to understand why. So we can scroll down in the case here, and now notice there are West headnotes here. Remember, the West headnotes are written by West editors. They're not part of the case, but they can help you understand little summaries of the points of law that are discussed in the case. They're not actually the text of the case, so don't rely on those for what the case said or as the authority from the case. You still have to go read the case, but that'll give you an idea of some of the things that the case is talking about. So if we scroll down here, let's go down to the 6th head note here. Talks about searches and seizures, and this subject here talks about a warrantless aerial observation from over a fenced-in backyard of a house. That sounds kind of similar to the issue that we're dealing with here, so why don't we take a look at this head note, this part of the case. This looks particularly relevant, so if you click on the number 6 with the head note, that will take you directly to the part of the case that talks about this issue. Remember that cases will always have multiple issues of law, some procedural, some substantive, so you want to make sure you're in the right head note. Obviously you want to read the whole case, but when you're focusing in on your research, you want to look at the right head note to make sure you understand exactly what the court was talking about and how it relates to your research problem, the specific issue of your research problem. In this case, you can look at some of these older cases that are cited in this section, and then you'll want to make a note of those cases to read those as part of your research. So now let's pop back up to the top. If you click on the 6 here, that'll pop you back to the head notes. Now the best way to use the head notes is to use the West key number system, which you can see over here on the right. And by the way, if you don't see those key numbers, look over here at the top at the beginning of the head notes. This change view button here will either hide or expose those. So you want those out so you can see them. And let's look back. Now remember, there are topics like general topics like searches and seizures, and then they get more and more specific. So what you want to do here with the West key number system is to go down to the most specific level, the lowest level, to find other cases on the same subject. You don't want searches and seizures because that's going to find every single case on searches and seizures. There's hundreds of thousands of those cases. That's going to be too much to deal with. You want to go with the most specific one here, which is aerial surveillance for this particular problem. So you would start with that, and when you click on this, this is like a Twitter hashtag where, if people hashtag something in Twitter, then other people can use that to find other people who are talking about the same issue by clicking on that hashtag. This works like that, where if you click on this, you'll find other cases that talk about the same point of law. So if we click on this, this will pull up all the other cases that talk about this same issue. Now notice this is just the one case, and that's because I have the jurisdiction here as U.S. Supreme Court. But you can change that by clicking on that change button. You can make it all federal courts. You can make it, just 7th Circuit. If you wanted to change to states, you could do that. But you can change that and find other cases that talk about that issue. So you can do that, and then you'll find other cases, both before and after this case, that talk about that issue of law. So that's the second method. Let's just back out of here real quick. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the citator, key cite. So there's a couple different things you can do with key cite. One of the things you can do with key cite is to determine whether or not your case is still good law. You'll notice at the top of the opinion here, there's a little key cite flag, key cite yellow flag, negative treatment. Now remember, just because you see something is negatively treated, it doesn't mean that you're not permitted to use the case as authority. Even if a case has been overruled, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use it. You have to understand why the subsequent cases, you have to look at those cases and try and understand why those cases treated your case negatively. Was it a case that distinguished your case based on the facts? And then you might want to argue that your case still looks at the first case and not the case that distinguished it. Is it a different point of law or head note? Remember that cases have multiple points of law, and it may be overruled on a point of law that's not relevant to your research. It might be from a different jurisdiction. It might not be binding in your jurisdiction. If you're in the 7th Circuit and the case that not overruled it but treated it negatively was some district court in Montana, well, that doesn't necessarily apply to you. So you don't have to. That's not binding on your jurisdiction. You can also use the same argument for a dissenting opinion. Dissenting opinions are not binding authority. So again, if it's cited in a dissenting opinion negatively, that doesn't mean you can't use it. So you've got to look at those cases. Now, one thing KeyCite will do is it'll give you this negative treatment tab here so you can see all of the cases that treated your case negatively. And then you can look at those to see why those cases treated negatively. So you got to read all those. So that's where you'll find those. The other thing you can do with KeyCite is look at these citing references. Here's all the cases and all the secondary sources that have discussed this case. So that's a good way to find additional references. And you can click on those. That's both of those are over 1,000. So what you would want to do is go in there. If you wanted to use this feature, go in there and then filter it down by using the head note, the keywords, keyword search, or by date. So like if you click on cases, you'll see there's 1,063 cases, but you can limit those by jurisdiction. You can limit them, you can do a keyword search for certain words within those. You can filter by head notes, so you only want things that cases that talk about head note 6. You can do it that way. There's lots of different ways you can deal with this data to limit the number, so you don't have to look at 1,000 cases. I'm going to click on the document button and then show you one more thing. I mentioned the head notes that you were looking at was number 6. Now, it doesn't say it right here, but when you see in West where it says 377 cases that cite this head note, this is a KeyCite report on that particular head note. So if you click on that, you're going to get a listing of all 377 cases that cite to the point of law from this head note. And you can do the same thing here. You can filter by federal, you can filter by jurisdiction, you can limit by keyword, and so forth. So that's how you would use this here, one good case, to find other good cases. And the nice thing about this is it will catch cases going back and forth. So you have the cases that the case relied on, the older cases, and the newer cases. And then one last thing I wanted to show you, which was the alert system. If you see this little bell right here, you can use that bell. Click on that little bell right over here. Up here, you can see that, by the way, that's in all of the windows wherever you are. But we'll go back to the KeyCite tab real quick. And if you go, let me go back to the KeyCite tab. Actually, I didn't want to leave that there, but we'll stick with the KeyCite tab. And then you will click on this bell, and then you can create a KeyCite alert. So right here it says KeyCite alert. You just fill in the name of the alert, the description, how often you want it delivered. You can have it delivered every day, and that way you will receive an email. If you want it every day, if you want it once a week, you'll get notified from West how often there are changes, if new cases, new secondary authority, and that's a way so that you don't have to go back in every week and look for new authority. It'll do it automatically for you and send the results. So if there is a new case that you need to know about, you can find out about it. So this is a good way to keep track of additional resources as they become available. So I'm going to take a real quick look at Lexis now, so we can show you the same case in Lexis and how what similarities and differences. Now real quick, I wanted to show you the case in Lexis, so I pulled it up in Lexis for you. Over here on the right is where you'll see the Shepardize's document. That's where you do the citator in Lexis, Shepards. If you click on this, well, first, if you can see some of the negative treatments here, notice there's different negative treatments, different numbers than we saw in Westlaw, so that's one of the things you want to note. They have different results. So if you have access to both citators, you should use both citators because they'll give you slightly different results, both in the cases they find and in the secondary sources. So that's a good way to make sure you're catching all the authority that you need to see. If you click on this Shepardize this document link, this is where everything is, and you can do the same thing. You can filter by jurisdiction and so forth. And then up here, if you click on this little bell, again, this is where you'd use the alert system like we just talked about in Westlaw. In KeyCite, you can do the same thing in Shepards. All right, now we're going to look at secondary sources. Remember that secondary sources explain or summarize primary law sources and provide citations to more primary sources. If you remember from first year legal research, there's a whole bunch of different types of secondary sources and a number of different ways to locate them. We're going to look at a couple of them specifically, treatises and practice materials, and law review and journal articles. So in order to locate these things, a couple different methods. You can use the library catalog, you can use a research guide on the subject, and you can use an online provider. You can usually do this by practice area or by entering terms in the word wheel at the top of the screen. Now this is the Westlaw secondary sources screen. This may look different from the last time you tried to use secondary sources in Westlaw. I got here from the secondary sources link on the main Westlaw page. They just list everything now. So the best way to find secondary sources in this system is to use the filters over here on the left side of the screen. So for this problem, you might want to look at topics, say look for a constitutional law. And then you might want to look for a type of publication, texts and treatises. So we'll find a treatise on constitutional law. Click on Apply Filters. And you can see there are 46 different secondary sources. If you scroll down, there's a treatise called Search and Seizure, a treatise on the Fourth Amendment. That sounds like a pretty good idea to check that one out if you wanted to do more research on search and seizure. And I just want to show you real quick in Lexis the other way to do this, which is by using the word wheel. So if you go into the main search box, you can just start by typing in search and seizure. If you click on the first thing that pops up, it says search and seizure. And this is a treatise in Lexis that's called search and seizure. So this is a good way to find that treatise. You can use the same thing. You can do keyword searches in Lexis and Westlaw to find journal articles. You can also use Hein Online or Legal Track for those. The advantage to using journal articles and treatises for this kind of problem, the reason I selected those two, those tend to be a little bit more scholarly. For an issue like this, there's a little bit more nuance necessary. You don't want just basic cases, but this is like a pretty focused issue, so you want something that's a little bit more higher level research than that, and that's what treatises and law journals are. So that's why you'd probably want to start with those as your secondary source to find additional information. And the nice thing about using the law journal articles for this problem is that they will give you, in addition to primary sources, they'll also give you there's a good chance you'll find something about public policy issues with these. So if you're looking to make public policy arguments, law journals can give you an idea on both sides of the issue what those public policy arguments are. So that's the review of the sources that we covered during first year legal research as they apply. So now a couple of general questions about research. Number one, how do you know when you should stop? How do you know when you've done enough research? Well, there's two limits that might make you stop. Number one is if you run out of time. If the person who gives the assignment to you says, I need this on my desk by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, at some point you're going to realize I need to stop researching and I got to start writing. So you just take whatever you got and start working with it. The other indicator is if you keep trying research, whatever you do, you keep trying it and it keeps sending you back to the same primary authorities. You try a new secondary source, whatever, it keeps giving you the same cases or whatever, the same references, then that probably means you found everything there is to find on the issue, and then it's a good time to stop researching and start writing. The last thing I wanted to go through with you guys was some of the resources besides specifically first year legal research resources that can help you out with your advocacy class. So one of these is the Appellate Advocacy Research Guide, and we have the URL right there. The Appellate Advocacy Research Guide has books, online resources, both databases and free web resources, lots of sources that you can use to help you with this class, resources that we have access to here in the library. I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to re-emphasize it here. The First Year Legal Research Guide, the Research Strategy tab on the First Year Legal Research Guide, that's where the research log sample was found. But it also has all kinds of other tips for doing research strategies, how to begin a project, how to ask questions, how to focus in on your research, and some other free online legal resources are available there too that are linked out from there. Things that we didn't necessarily cover during first year legal research. So that's a nice helpful resource to use, not just in your appellate advocacy class, but in whatever research projects you're doing. It's a good place to go back and refer to it. We do have a couple of things that can help you with studying, one of which is the Study Aid, Study Skills, and Exam Prep Research Guide, which is linked there, that has lists of all the study aids you have access to, whether they're in print or online. and they're arranged by subject. So again, not just for the class you're in, but for all the classes you're enrolled in, not just for your advocacy class. There's all kinds of study aids that can help you. And a lot of those are found in our West Study Aid subscription, which you can get to off the Law Library's website from the A to Z database list. You guys should be familiar with that from last year, because if you took first year legal research last year, we used the Legal Research in a Nutshell as our textbook. That was part of the West Study Aid subscription. So there's a lot more in there besides just the Nutshell series. There's all kinds of legal research resources and substantive law resources as well that you can use for all of your classes. And it's arranged by topic, by different types of material, so all kinds of materials in there that you can use. We highly recommend that you use those to help you with your studies. I hope that answered all the questions you might have, but if you do have more questions, you can look at the Law Library's website. You can come in and see us, or call us, or email us, and that's how you can do that. You can see our contact information, how to find us, and just remember that we do have professional reference librarians on duty here 7 days a week. We do have some evening hours till either 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock during the week. We have someone here on Saturday. We have someone here on Sunday while you're here. We do answer the email within 24 hours. We'll answer any emailed reference questions. So we are here for you, and we'll be happy to help you out with any of your questions. So good luck to you.